Hi, everybody that's joining in. We're just going to give folks a minute and then we'll get started. We have a good turnout. We're at 50, 60 people now. Very excited. Okay, let's get started. AK, do you want to start recording? Please. Just as a heads up, everybody, this session will be recorded and shared after the webinar. So we are going to start recording now. Thank you. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know where y'all are joining from, but thank you so much for being here today. Today, we are here on this webinar to do a little exploration of our relationship to money and how to begin the healing journey when it comes to healing that relationship to money. Just a few things to keep note of. There is a separate Q&A box and there's a separate chat box. So the chat box, we're going to invite you to respond and interact with each other. If you are comfortable, definitely drop in your name, where you're joining us from, say hi, whatever you're comfortable sharing. And I encourage you all that if you meet somebody who is going through a similar situation or you want to stay in touch, that you can absolutely private message them through the chat to stay in contact. But we really want folks to feel supported and walk away with community if that's something that you're looking for in this journey. So definitely feel free to interact in the chat. Even when we're not prompting you to, you're more than welcome. The Q&A box specifically is for when you have questions. So it's easier for us to keep track of questions if you drop them in the Q&A box, because sometimes they'll get lost in the chat. So like I mentioned, Q&A box is for questions. Chat box is to talk to each other, to share out thoughts. There'll be reflection and writing exercises, thinking exercises throughout the webinar. So if you have a chance to go grab a notebook, if you have one, or if you're more of a thinker, then get ready to kind of like think on some of these questions. But let's get started. My name is Tania Ventura. I'm the Director of Service Provider Engagement and Education at FreeFrom. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a survivor myself, and I've been doing this work for about 4 years, going on 5 now, pretty much since FreeFrom got started. I've worn many hats at FreeFrom. I've been an entrepreneurship coach. I have supported the launch of our social enterprise. And now I'm really in a coaching relationship and in a partnership relationship with a lot of organizations that are supporting survivors directly. So for example, domestic violence shelters or IPV drop-in services, and really supporting them and helping create financial supportive services for the survivors that they serve and support, as well as advocating for better working conditions for the service providers that are doing this work. I'm going to hand it over to M so that they can introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is M. Jackson. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm the Director of Peer Engagement and Support at FreeFrom. I've been doing this work for a little over 2 years. And in my role specifically, what I do is work directly with survivors to figure out different ways that we can help them to create different pathways to financial freedom and building community with other survivors. And one of the main programs that I take the lead on is our survivor-led peer-to-peer financial support groups. So once this presentation is over, you will receive an email from us and it will have a little snippet of information about that program. And if you're interested in starting a peer-to-peer financial support group, or you would like to join one, then you can contact me and you'll have that information in the follow-up email. Very happy to be here with y'all, and I'll turn it back over to Tanya.
Thanks, M. So between M and I, we are here to support survivors who are service providers and working in the intimate partner violence movement, or the movement against intimate partner violence. And M directly works with survivors who are just out in the community. So between the both of us, I think we will hopefully have a great time today. But before we get started, I do want to give everyone a a content warning that we will be talking about money, and some of the feelings that might come up might be challenging. So please feel free to take care of yourself. If you need to stop and just watch the recording later, that is completely okay. At the end of the day, this is your relationship to money and your healing journey. So please do whatever feels the most comfortable to you. So we're going to start with some grounding. So everybody, if you can find a comfy position to sit at, or if you want to stand up or lay down, we don't know where you are, so you can do whatever you want, but take a few deep breaths. Close your eyes if you want to. Sit comfortably or choose a body position that feels good. So let's take a breath together. And then let it go. And just take a few more of those breaths. My nose is a little stuffy. I'm so sorry if you can hear it. Check in with yourself as you're breathing. How are you feeling today? Where are you feeling it in your body? What are you bringing with you? And what are you leaving behind? So think about those questions. Really connect with your body and your feelings in this moment if you can. And then come back to our virtual room. Look around. If you're sitting somewhere, look behind you. Shake out your shoulders, move your neck around. Just really get grounded into the space. Remind yourself we are in the present. We are here. And if you can't be present, that's okay. Like I said, you can jump off whenever you want to and come back to this later. All right, so open your eyes if you haven't, and let's get started. So on our agenda today is, I'm going to do a quick introduction of FreeFrom for those of you that are new to what we do. Then we're going to jump into why is money and our relationship to money important. And then we're going to jump into our money story exercise. So this is really when we're going to do a lot of reflection on our own experiences. So if that's something that you want a heads up about, that'll happen about midway through this webinar. And then we're going to close up with helping folks think about how can they heal and rebuild the relationship to money. So coming up with a plan. Then we're going to debrief and do a Q&A at the end. But if you have questions, like I said, please drop them in the Q&A box. And if they're urgent, we'll jump on them right away. So a little bit about FreeFrom. We are a nonprofit agency that has been around, I think, for about 5 years now. I should know because I joined right away, but what is time in this age of COVID? But we envision a world where survivors have sustaining income, savings, and credit with which to build wealth and the resources to support individual, intergenerational, and community healing. To that end, we are taking a holistic approach using data, technology, peer-to-peer networks, training for programs and shelters, policy advocacy, social enterprise models, and cross-sector solutions. So a lot of words pretty much to say that we are dedicated to supporting survivors, whether they're service providers or just survivors, in creating financial wellness. And we take a number of different approaches to do that, as you heard from M&I's introductions. So let's jump into why is money and our relationship to money is important. So I'm going to start off with some data points about just money and how it tends to be a challenging thing that happens to a lot of us who are survivors and experience specifically economic abuse. But before I do that, let's start with a quick question. So what do you think about when you think about the word money? So you can write this down, you can think about it. If you're comfortable, you can share out in the chat box. So what do you think about when you think about the word money? And AK, I'll pause to let you read some responses. We could just read one or two.
Okay, we're hearing responsibilities, not enough. Bills, resources, independence. So there's some.
Thank you. Thank you, AK. I don't know if I mentioned it, but AK from our team is joining us to support with the chat box and the Q&A and all that. Sorry, AK, if I didn't introduce you before. But thank you so much. So yeah, you know, everybody has its own, has something different come up for them, right? So I think one thing we're going to learn through this webinar is that we all have a unique relationship and experience with money. So why are we doing this? You know, why is money such a big, important topic for supporting survivors create a financial well-being? For the first part, surviving violence is expensive and healing is expensive. Staying safe is expensive. So therefore, economic justice is healing justice. And I'll get into a little bit about what we mean by surviving violence is expensive, healing is expensive, and staying safe is expensive. So to give you an idea, and some of y'all might feel this, but maybe have never really thought about, you know, putting a number to it, but the lifetime costs of intimate partner violence, including the cost of related health problems, lost productivity, and criminal justice costs, is about $104,000 for women and about $23,500 for men. So if you think about somebody losing about $104,000 just because they experience intimate partner violence, that's a lot of money. For some of us, that's like a couple years of our salary. So when we think about what we need to recover from that, it's important to also think about the money aspect that comes into play here. So we did a separate report recently from our Survivors Know Best Fund. And we learned, we wanted to ask a little bit more questions about how survivors are specifically experiencing economic abuse, which is just a way in which harm doers sometimes control finances of a survivor. And we learned that each month, 1,280 is stolen by a harm doer from a survivor. We also learned that each year, about 16,000 is incurred in coerced or fraudulent debt. When it comes to specifically how much income people lose, it's 23,000, about 23,000. And about 1,800 caused in property damage. So this all is to say, if some of you are feeling like you're still financially recovering from the harm that you experienced or that you endured, this is why you're probably still feeling that, because it's extremely expensive to survive and experience violence. And I think sometimes we don't realize that or haven't been able to put a number on it, but hopefully this helps really quantify how much money has been lost just because you survived violence. And then on top of that, we know that BIPOC or Black, Indigenous people of color and folks who are LGBTQ plus experience greater obstacles to financial security. So for every $1 white men earn, Asian women earn only 90 cents, Black women earn only 62 cents, Native American women earn only 57 cents, and Latinx women earn only 54 cents. And for every $1 white men own, Black and Latinx women only own pennies, and Native American women own less than 1/10 of the median wealth of the Americans. So we already know surviving violence is extremely expensive. And then on top of that, we live in a society that creates further racial and gender wage gaps. So when you're both, when you're a person of color or LGBTQ plus and the survivor, the cost of surviving is even more expensive. So here are some examples of how it starts to look like when there's intersections of survivorship and other things going on. So for example, people who survive or experience gender-based violence sometimes have not been allowed to work by their harm doer, leaving them with little to no work history and making acquiring traditional employment difficult. So when they're entering the work field, they're having to start at entry-level positions and may not be offered the most favorable work conditions that are conducive to their healing journey. So this, we're seeing a person who is a survivor experience specific economic challenges due to their survivorship. Next example is service providers working in the GBV movement, so the gender-based violence movement or the movement against violence. Survivors who become service providers working in the gender-based violence movement often feel called to do this work because of their experience. However, most service providers in the gender-based violence movement work 50 plus hours and are paid minimum or close to minimum wage. So that means service providers are not being able to afford opportunities to heal, build safety, and access the resources that they need. And are tasked yet with, like, you know, very big emotional and physical labor sometimes. And lastly, folks who are undocumented. So folks who are undocumented or immigrants to the US may have little knowledge on how to participate in our economy. And really it's because different countries have different economies. And you know, the US is a very capitalist economy, which some of you mentioned came up for you when you heard the word money. Some folks may be fleeing, you know, war or corrupt governments where financial institutions become a place of power. So once they're trying to, you know, really get comfortable in the US, it can be difficult to navigate all the misconceptions about what the financial system here in the US looks like and what they have access to just due to their immigration status. So that can be, you know, like thinking that they can't have a bank account, or, you know, not really understanding credit and so on and so forth, which can make things for a survivor who's undocumented even more difficult. Okay, so let's take a few moments to reflect on these examples of financial harm and inequality. So think about, you know, how these overlap in your life or in the folks around you. And then we will move on into exploring your own relationship to money. So this was really more of a like big picture, how does money intersect with survivorship, race, and gender? But take a few moments to reflect on other examples that you've seen, and then we will move on to the next story, to the money story, and I'll hand it off to him. Okay, and it's all yours.
All right. So when we're thinking about our money story, maybe some of you have heard about the concept of a money story, maybe some have not. By the time that we're done talking about this, then you will be able to have said that you do have an understanding of it. So we all have a money story. Think of it as the blueprint to your thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and attitudes about money. Our money story is something that was really created for us when we were young, and it's influenced by our caregivers, our parents, anyone that had heavy influence on our upbringing. And it's something that can stick with us. But as I mentioned, it's really a blueprint. So it's something that you can take and you can figure out, what do you want to keep? What do you want to change? Do you want to create a whole different blueprint to really support your healing journey and where you see yourself in your own money story? So I want us to go ahead and take some time to really dive into our money stories. If you could go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So I want us to start by looking at fear that can come up when we're even talking about money. Many times when you think about the subject of money, of finances, it's a touchy subject for a lot of folks. And a lot of that can come from what we were taught when we were younger, what we kept with us, and even what we see in the media, you know, and how much people are talking about it or not talking about it. So it can feel really, really scary, too personal. You don't really want everyone in your business to talk about those things. But also when you go back to thinking through your own cultural beliefs around money, if you were taught growing up that that's something that you don't really discuss, you don't discuss outside of the family, or maybe you really didn't even discuss inside the family. Things may have just been taken care of, or you didn't really see any struggles. That everyone has a different experience with that. But that really forms our beliefs about us being able to have that fear or avoidance when we discuss those financial topics. Also, you may not feel confident about your own money abilities. Many of us, if we know we don't have a lot of knowledge in that subject matter, we may, not really want to dive into that. We might not want to discuss that with other people because it may be a little bit of shame around that too. So if you're not feeling knowledgeable about money, why would you even want to discuss it? And then when you incorporate your financial traumas that you've experienced as well. As Tanya and I both shared, we both are survivors, and we understand and we get how tough those conversations can be. And especially if you are a survivor that's also a service provider, how difficult that can be to have that conversation with yourself and then have that conversation with clients as well, or even just other survivors. So it's a lot that can come together when you're thinking through where that fear, where that avoidance is coming from. But again, you can make that decision of where is that and where do I want to change that, so I'm able to be a bit more open when discussing money, even with just yourself. Next slide, please. So when we're avoiding talking about that, what do we miss? So if we're practicing avoidance, which can come, it might not be something that we're doing intentionally. What can happen is that economic abuse can continue to go unnoticed and can get worse. And even just to take a step back, maybe we don't even realize what economic abuse is because we're not talking about it, because we're not discussing it. So we don't know that that's an area that we're receiving harm. And so it can continue to go on because we're not really having those conversations with ourselves and with others. And you're missing out on opportunities for economic growth. If you aren't comfortable with looking at your own money, talking about your own money situation, how can you really have that opportunity to see where you can grow economically, where you can be where you see yourself financially in the present and in the future as well? And then there are inequalities around money that can go unnoticed and unchecked. So a great example of that is in the workforce. Many times we are taught to not discuss what your salary is. And if we're not discussing what our salary is, then you don't know if someone is doing the same job as you and they're making much more than you. I have a personal example of that where I had a coworker that was in the same position that I was in. However, she was bilingual. And so she had to take a test to be able to have that position as an employee that was bilingual as well. And she should have been making more. However, through conversation that we were having, I was comfortable with saying, this is how much I'm making. And she found out that she was not, she was making less, much less than I was making. And so from that conversation, I let her know, you can go ahead and provide, the higher ups about the information that I provided you of my own salary. And from that, she was able to have the courage to go and to have an equity increase in her salary. And so that would not have happened if we wouldn't have had that conversation. If I wouldn't have been comfortable myself with being able to talk about my own salary and to be able to encourage her to be able to get that equity increase as well. And so most importantly, thinking through healing in general can be tough. It can be a lifetime journey. But that financial trauma that goes along with our healing as well is important. And if we're not talking about money, then we're missing out on that critical piece. It has such a heavy influence on our life. And also when Tanya talked about the cost of being a survivor, the cost of economic abuse, if we're not focusing on that economic piece, then we're really missing out on that healing piece as well that goes along with it. Okay, so I would like to go to the next slide. And I would like to invite you all to be able to join the discussion if you feel comfortable. And if you were the person that needed to write things down, go ahead and get your piece of paper and something to write with, or you can just think about it as well. So I would like to invite you to answer this question that's on the screen. What is your earliest memory of money? And as you all are writing this down for yourselves, also feel free to drop your responses in the chat as well. It can be really comforting to hear from other folks and to hear similar experiences and feel like you're not in this alone. Okay, next slide, please. So now I want you to think of a money-related memory from your teen or young adult years. So what's a memory that really sticks out to you when you're thinking about that time period of your life, when you were a teen or young adult? And if you could write that down, or you can put it in the chat, or just think about it. And I see responses coming in. I really appreciate everyone that is practicing vulnerability in this moment. And even those that aren't, putting answers into the chat, I appreciate those who have accepted the invitation to do this exercise. Next slide, please. And then I want you to think about what your most recent memory of money is. So you've thought about your earliest, you've thought about your teen and adult years, or early adult years. What about your most recent? Next slide, please. Now I want you to reflect on these two memories. And I want you to try to fill in what happened in between those time periods. Note any changes to your relationship to money, any harm that you experienced, and any personal successes related to money. So again, we're reflecting on those 3 time periods. And we're thinking about what changes occurred within your relationship to money. AK, would you mind reading a few of those responses?
Yeah, managing money and trying to save, loaning money to another survivor, goals and release of fear, feeling more in control and hopeful. And in between, I did not value money and I did not value myself.
Thank you so much for reading those, AK. And again, thank y'all for your vulnerability. Next slide, please. So what are some messages you receive throughout your money story about money? Think about those 3 time periods. All right, next slide, please. And then I want you to look at these 3 questions that are on the screen. Feel free to answer each of them, or you can just choose just one. What are the sore spots in your money story? What are the joyful spots in your money story? What are the growth spots in your money story? All right, next slide, please. What does financial freedom look like to you? Have you ever felt financially free? If yes, what did that feel like? So we've taken time to reflect. We've thought about some sore spots. But when you're thinking about feeling truly financially free, what does that look like? And if you felt that, what did that feel like? AK, would you mind reading some responses?
Mhm. So not needing to rely on anyone else, being debt free and having money left out of my paychecks, ownership and control of my life, more being debt free, having access to everything that we need, and having emergency funds always available.
Thank you, AK. How are money and wellness connected in your life? Think through that. Are there any boundaries that you have to have in place for you to feel financially free and feel well? What's that connection look like? What does it look like when it's not balanced? Next slide, please. How does money show up in your work, business, ability to make, save, and manage money? So at this point of the exercise, we're really connecting everything. And we're really thinking about that money story that we have. How did it show up in our lives when we were younger? How did it show up in our teen and our early adult years? How is it showing up now? And when we're thinking about what we saw as financial freedom or what we see as financial freedom, how are we working towards that? What do we need in our healing to be able to work towards that? Is there anything we need to let go of? Is there anything that we need to do more of or continue to do? Okay, so I see that there's a lot of responses coming in. I'm very appreciative of that. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. Before we go to a break, what I would like to say is this is something that you can continuously do throughout your life. You can reflect on your money story because it's not something that has to stay the same. What you had experienced in the past, it doesn't mean that that has to be your future. And where you are currently, it may be where you want to be, it may not be, but you can have that community around you. That's what we're for here at FreeFrom. Other survivors are for, to be able to really assist in getting to where you would like to go. So I really appreciate those of you that accepted that invitation to participate in the exercise. Feel free to do this once again a few more times this year or later on in your life to really reflect. At this time, we want to make sure that we give folks a bit of a break. I know that could have been a lot when you're thinking about your past, even thinking about your present, thinking about past economic abuse, what you're experiencing currently. So we want to give you all a break before we dive into the next topic, and I turn it over to Tanya. But again, thank you so much for accepting the invitation and participating. So we will come back at 10:37 Pacific time. Does that sound right, Tanya? Excellent.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you, AK, for that. Glad that you all are still here and joining us on this Friday. I am going to turn it over to Tanya to continue on. And I know we had a question about when we will have training for shelter programs, and Tanya will be answering that question for you all at the end. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Em, and thank you everybody for participating in those reflection questions. So now that you kind of explored your relationship to money, you know where your sore spots are, your joyful spots are, your growth moments are. I really want to take a moment to talk about how can we heal and rebuild our relationship to money. So before we get started, I want to talk about what is financial autonomy. So we talked a little bit about financial freedom, about all these feelings that we are aspiring to get to when it comes to money. And what financial autonomy is, it is the ability to make your own financial decisions. It means you have access to your own money, confidence when it comes to money. So you feel confident when it comes to your own money or your ability to talk about money. Being able to financially recuperate when something happens. So this is super important in helping us avoid crisis moments. Your money is secure in a way that feels right to you. So safety and security look different for everybody. So really thinking about, you know, how can I feel like my money is safe and secure? And like I said, that's different for everybody. Trusting yourself when it comes to money and being trusted with your own money. So that one's super important, right? There's a piece where you trust yourself, but then there's also a piece where you feel like you're being trusted with your money. And it kind of goes hand in hand, because if you perceive that people aren't trusting you with your own money, and we see that a lot when it comes to like government programs and government aid. So feeling like, you know, we're being interrogated or having to prove something when it comes to our money, that doesn't help. Like, it doesn't feel like someone is trusting us, so it can be more difficult to trust yourself. But if you can be strong in your own trust with your money, even on bad days, then that can really be helpful in the healing journey. And the reason why I'm defining this is just because I might talk about it as in the next few slides, and I want you all to know what I'm talking about. But what else comes to mind for you? So think about, you know, what financial autonomy looks like to you. So what does it mean to feel confident, to feel secure and safe in your ability to make financial decisions, to spend, use, make money, and save? So really think about that question for yourself. So we're going to start off by talking about what are some tools, medicines, and healing practices. That's what really this section is about. So I would love to hear from you all. So some of y'all that are maybe already working on feeling like you're in a better place with your money or your money story or your money journey. What are some tools? So tools can be anything. Tools can be money. I heard some of y'all mention in the chat that, you know, money isn't the say all, but it's more of a tool. I love that. We'll actually talk about that soon. What are some medicines? So for people, medicine can be, you know, different practices. It can be herbs. It can be medicine, but really thinking about, you know, what are some things that you take or do when you're feeling sick, or you're feeling those sore spots in your money journey. And what are some healing practices? So practices that you do, these can be like activities or movements or the services that you're accessing. So what are tools, medicines, and healing practices that you're using or have used to heal your money traumas? So again, money traumas are those sore spots in our money story, where we have been harmed or felt something was unjust in our money story, or felt some disproportion of power in our story. You're more than welcome to type some of those into the chat. And we'll move on. But actually, I want to hear from y'all. And I think this is probably the most exciting part, because I love hearing what people are doing. So AK, if you can read a couple for me, please.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so talking to a therapist, journaling any thoughts, insecurities, and also affirmations and goals, meditation, accessing public resources if needed, self-pampering, and then also some somatic practices and learning budgeting skills.
Great. And all of these forms of tools, medicines, and healing practices are valid. And I think that that's one thing that I want to be very clear as we move on to this next section. What works for somebody might not work for you. What works for somebody might work for you, or maybe it will serve as an inspiration to do something different or similar. But also what doesn't work for you tells you a lot about how you can really start to begin to heal some of those sore spots or traumas that have come up in your story. So let's jump into some common ones. Okay, so some common healing tools, medicines, and practices. We're going to cover 3. So we're going to talk about money as a tool. So one thing I want everybody on this call to understand is that money is not good or bad. It does not determine who you are or your value. Sorry, morning burps, I guess. Money is a tool that gives folks access to healing. So we think about it as a tool, like some of y'all already mentioned in the chat. I love that some of y'all had already began to have that relationship to money. Then we can start seeing it as an avenue to help us get access to the things that we need. So for example, access to income, grants, donations, or gifts, financial aid, reparations, child support, alimony, compensation for the harm that you endured, etc., are all ways in which you can get money for the harm that you experience. And really, it means removing the shame and wanting or accessing these things. So sometimes people feel ashamed to access some of these things that I'm mentioning. So they're ashamed to ask people for help, financial help. They might be ashamed for asking for alimony or child support, when in reality, those things might be really critical tools in helping you heal and helping you repay some of that debt that we talked about in the beginning of the PowerPoint. So some of that $104,000 or $25,000, whatever it may be. So really thinking about, there is no shame in asking for these things or wanting these things. So you can absolutely say, the most valuable thing in my healing journey is money. So please give me money or help me access money, or that is what's gonna, at the end of the day, help me pay my rent, help me get to a safer place, so on and so forth. And that's completely okay to want and to need in your healing journey. A resource that I wanted to share here is our compensation compass that you can access when you get this PowerPoint at the as a follow-up. So the compensation compass asks you questions about the harm that you experienced or endured and helps you realize what are the avenues to compensation available to me. So am I eligible for victims of crime funding, for example? Am I eligible to sue the person who abused me for compensation, so on and so forth. So this is a great tool for folks who are interested in learning, what legal avenues to compensation is available to them. So at the end of the day, if you are feeling like money is what I need in this journey, that is valid, that is 100% okay. And if you are feeling shame in admitting that you need money, or you feel this need, but for some reason you don't want to say it or feel ashamed of it or fearful of it, that is okay too. And there are people here to support you and helping you feel better about wanting to ask that or wanting to get these money tools available to you. Next is counseling, coaching, and therapy, which some of y'all mentioned in the chat. So sometimes having an expert who can help you talk through your money story, financial traumas, and healing goals can give you a sense of support, accountability, and relief. So something that is super important when you're trying to find a counselor, a coach, or a therapist is to practice your ability to make the right choices for yourself, and do not feel like you have to settle for the first person, for example, that your insurance refers you to. So really think about, to the last point, that you are hiring a counselor, coach, and therapist. So it's okay to interview them before deciding if they are the best fit for you. So sometimes it can be discouraging to access counseling, coaching, or therapy because you're really at your insurance's whim, or you don't know where to start, or you don't know if you can trust somebody new. And it is completely okay to have a set of questions that you want to ask. So for example, have you ever worked with a survivor that experienced economic abuse, for example, is a great question. Or if you are a person of color, have you ever worked with, for example, me, Latinas? who are survivors, like getting very specific with whoever it is that you want to hire and what ideologies you want them to have is important. So for example, it might be discouraging if you're queer, like me, and you're having to explain your queerness to a therapist all the time. So really thinking about what are some core values that you want your counselor coach to have so that you feel safer with them and you can have a long-term relationship with them. It is not a waste of your time or their time to really take some time to interview them and get to know them before you decide if they're the right person for you. Also, if Western or global North medicine is not for you, explore cultural specific mind, emotional, and psyche healers. So there are many ways outside of like traditional counseling, coaching, and therapy in many different religions that help you kind of heal those parts of yourself as well, and who are just valid and just as experts as Western and Northern and global North doctors. So that's just something to consider. If traditional therapy, coaching, counseling isn't right for you, then maybe look into your own cultural specific resources in this space. And then last but not least, because there's many, many more, as y'all explained in your chat share out, is mindfulness and self practices that you can do. So bringing your relationship to money and your feelings around money can help you become more connected to your healing process. So things that can help you be more mindful of your relationship to money and things that you can incorporate into your self practices. So that means you yourself are doing these are things like meditation or prayer. So meditation and prayer can be, for different religious beliefs, different cultures have different practices here. It can be journaling, drawing, painting, which I saw some of y'all share out in the chat box. It can be creating affirmations. So for those of you that mentioned that you have affirmations, this is great. So affirmations are things like, I am capable of making money. I trust my ability to make financial decisions, and creating practices around these affirmations. So for example, when I'm working with a new affirmation, I'll light a candle to bring it into the physical world. So I'm saying it out loud, I'm lighting the candle and I'm bringing it into the physical space. So it's not just, floating up here in my mind. So different people will find different ways to interact with their affirmations and bring them into their daily life. And then creating tangible goals. So some of y'all mentioned that you are creating goals, financial goals for yourself. And that is also a great way to become more mindful and to really create practices for yourself. And what we mean by tangible goals, these are goals that are realistic and that can be achieved in short term. And what we've noticed is that creating short-term goals and getting to those goals can be a lot more encouraging than creating a big goal that is going to take you years to get to. I'm not saying don't create that big goal, but create that big goal and then create little goals that can keep you encouraged, keep you feeling good about how you're interacting with your money to help you get ultimately to that big goal. So for example, some of these tangible goals can be like, save $5 this month. That's all I got to do this month. If I save $5, then, maybe I get to buy myself a yummy little snack afterwards. And, creating like ways to incentivize yourself, to celebrate yourself. Even if the wins are super small, they are still wins and they will get you to that bigger goal that you want. So paying $10 more above my minimum payment on this credit card this month, or making sure that you spend money for yourself this week is also a goal. So if you are ashamed about spending money on yourself, here is your permission to not be ashamed of doing that. If that is a goal that you are working on and that you realize that you really need to be more comfortable with spending money on yourself, maybe find a small way to spend money on yourself that week, and that can feel really good to kind of practice and get used to. So how do you know which one's the best one? So this one is a good question. And I wish I could tell you right now in which one is the best one for you, but I can't. So the best I can do is give you some guiding questions. And I hope you spend some time thinking about these. So some questions to think about is, what do you envision in this healing journey? Is someone there with you, or do you prefer to be on your own? If someone is with you, who are they? Are they a friend? Are they a therapist? Are they a family member? Are they a partner? Who are they? And if you prefer to do this on your own, great. It's simpler. You don't have to talk to anybody or find anybody yet. What have you tried? What worked and what didn't, and why? So like I said, it's important to understand what works, equally as important to understand what didn't, because both will teach you a lot about your relationship to money. growth spots, sore spots, joyful spots. What is your learning style? So thinking about back in your like school days, so what learning style really appealed to you? Are you a visual learner? Do you like seeing things? Are you an auditory learner? That means you like hearing things. Are you interactive? You like doing and seeing and hearing. So all of the above, you like really being immersed in the experience. So I think that's super important when you're picking your healing journey, because you don't want to pick something that is going to be that doesn't align with how you learn and how you grow, because at the end of the day, healing your relationship to money is almost like learning a new skill, learning a new ability, learning about yourself every day. And like I mentioned, it's an ongoing thing. So really you want to be mindful of how you learn and how you best start interacting with new information and changes. And in what kind of spaces do you feel like you can be the most honest and authentic? So you don't want to commit to a healing experience or journey that doesn't feel authentic or honest to you, right? Or where you feel like you have to hide, or you feel like you have to, you know, sugarcoat what happened to you. Like, it's important to be honest and authentic in this experience. Otherwise, you know, we're going to continue to kind of overlook some of those raw spots or sore spots that can be hard to kind of sit with and be honest and authentic about. And what do you already have access to that can help you get started this week? So think about, you know, what can I do this week? So maybe you're realizing, you know, I really do want to seek maybe like a Reiki practitioner. So maybe that's something that you do this week. I have a laptop or a phone, and therefore I can Google some practitioners in my area. Or maybe you're like, you know what, I could really use an affirmation in my journey. So maybe this week you decide to create one. You know, I got pen, I got a paper, let me start doodling some affirmations. So really thinking about what you already have access to, what you can use this week to get started. And if you don't have things that you need, how can you, you know, make a plan to get access to those things? All right, so we're going to debrief. We're coming towards the end. I know we just covered a lot of things. Thank you all so much for participating. So I want you to honor the feelings, thoughts, memories, and ideas that came up in this webinar. Write them down, draw them out, sit with them, make a to-do list, give them space in whatever way is meaningful to you. If you want to make plans to talk to somebody about the things that came up, please do so. And then take a couple deep breaths and think through your last thoughts, and share out in the chat box any, like, you know, things that came to you that you want to work on, your next move, if you're comfortable. Oh, deep breaths always feel so good. So I hope you didn't all feel rushed, but just remember that you will have access to these questions. So if you feel like you need more time with any of the exercises that we covered, 100% that is okay. And we invite you to review the recording and the PowerPoint afterwards. All right, so let's get into some of the questions. So we have 5 minutes for questions. AK, do you want to read some out loud?
Yeah, so there was the pending question, when will you have training for shelter programs, and does your group have resources for therapists?
Yeah, so we train different agencies in different ways. So we have a 1-year program called the Survivor Wealth and Wellness Training, which is a 1-year partnership that we take on with agencies that costs $1,000 per person that is being trained at that agency. But we also have other ways. So we'll do trainings like this specifically for agencies upon request. We can work on special projects that you need a consultant on. So there's just different ways that we can work with your agency, and these are ongoing. So if that is of interest to you, my email is down here, taniaventura@freefrom.org, and you can reach out and we can definitely chat about that. Now, resources for therapists. I know we have a like 1-pager on how to talk about money with survivors. And I'm sure we can send that out. You can reach out to Em or I or both of us, and we can share that with you. Any other questions?
I did notice in the chat that someone had mentioned that they wish they had someone to be there for them that they could lean on. And that is something that you can do in the survivor-led peer-to-peer financial support groups. Those are groups that really help folks to come together in a peer-to-peer setting to work towards financial freedom, but also go along that healing journey together. It's something that we have a very hands-off approach with, and it is survivor-led. So we're not facilitating it, but it's other folks that are also survivors that are there for you within those meetings. So that could be something that you could explore, just to answer that comment that I saw.
Yeah, I saw that one come in as a question too.
Okay, we do you have forms and questions for individuals that work with survivors and are trying to learn how to save money or have goals?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think I saw that question in there twice. So I'll answer that. Yes, we do. We do, like I mentioned, we have that one pager on like how to coach survivors around money that gives some great tips about just like having money conversations generally. And then for the folks that are enrolled in our Survivor Wealth and Wellness 1-year program, that's all it is. It's a lot of coaching, a lot of training around how do you first of all understand all these different financial components. So what is credit, what is budgeting, what is, all these different financial things. And also, how do you as a service provider, how does your relationship to money show up when you're doing this work? And how do you talk about these things? So how do you talk to a survivor? What kind of questions, what kind of intake questions could he ask to be more supportive in this space? So yes, we do have that, but the best way to learn more about that is to email me. So my email is down here, taniaventura@freefrom.org. Any others?
I just wanted to go ahead and say with the peer-to-peer financial support groups, they're all virtual. I answered this in the chat box, but just so everyone knows, we provide the virtual meeting spaces, but they are virtual at the moment. And so it's all throughout the United States. And you'll have more information about those in the follow-up email, as well as my contact information if you want to learn more.
Yeah. All right, so it looks like we are at time. So you will all receive a follow-up email, which includes the recording of this webinar, as well as the PowerPoint slides. And you will also receive invitations to our upcoming webinar. So the next webinar series will be on policy change and how survivors or people working in the gender-based violence movement can work more in the policy space. And you'll also receive an invitation to M's upcoming information session on peer-to-peer groups. So look out for that email, reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you all so much for your vulnerability, your honesty, your openness to connect in the chat box. Your share outs, I'm sure, help somebody who is viewing and maybe not all the way comfy yet to share out. So thank you. And we will all see each other soon, hopefully in our next webinar. All right. Bye, everybody.